As you, of course, may have seen, undoubtedly, if you've looked at the news at all in the past 24 hours, Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, traveled to the United States yesterday, the 24th, of July. He spoke before a joint session of Congress. A number of Congress people did boycott the speech, but it was still pretty full, still pretty significant speech. A lot to be said. Well, I don't know if it was that significant, but certainly it made a big political impact. I'll say that much, as well as the large protests. So a lot to be said about all of this. But before I editorialize too much, very happy to bring on to the show, honored, I'd say, Miriam Osman, who is an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement. Miriam, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, really, it's a pleasure to have you here on the show. And yesterday, Netanyahu spoke before Congress, and he said a lot. And I guess maybe before I say too much, I'll just ask you what you thought of the substance of the speech and what he had to say yesterday.
Yeah, thanks, Eugene. I mean, I think most people would agree that in many ways, Netanyahu's speech yesterday was a total failure, not just in terms of the substance of what he delivered, but also what it did for the political establishment. I mean, if you look at the footage, we had televised footage of, nearly 50 standing ovations for a genocidal maniac, standing ovations for blatant lies that nobody is fooled by any longer. So really the violence of the political class here was barefaced in Congress yesterday. So that's one thing that this speech accomplished. But to get into a little more of the details of the speech itself, I think there's a few things that are important to draw out and that tell us a lot about the state of the war and Israel's genocide in Gaza. But first thing, I think, is he made it really clear that he is not interested in negotiations, not interested in accepting any sort of ceasefire deal, and was in fact giving these really unrealistic conditions for the resistance to accept. He said he is going to continue as long as it takes until, quote unquote, total victory, which of course we know they're not going to be able to achieve. So I hope it's clear, from this speech in his own words, that really it's the Israelis who are refusing to negotiate. And this comes up time and time again, trying to blame the Palestinians for the failures of the negotiations. But now we have, in Netanyahu's own words, we see exactly who it is who's responsible for the failure of these negotiations. The second thing that we saw was really this entire speech was a plea for faster delivery of military aid. And the way that he carried this plea out, I think, is really telling. It showed weakness on the Israeli side, but also he was raising the specter of Iran and a regional war in this. So he was making this argument that, supposedly Israel is the only thing standing in the way of Iran for the U.S. The U.S. has to give more aid. And, he said, I think, to quote it, he said, fast-tracking U.S. military aid would dramatically expedite an end to the war in Gaza and help prevent a broader war in the Middle East. So he's really almost threatening with continuing this and escalating to a regional war, which, as we know, the U.S. is really wary of. But again, what it's showing here is that there's an inability for Zionist forces to achieve any of their military goals during this war. And he's going to do whatever it takes to keep getting U.S. aid as fast as possible. And of course, we had all of these Congress people giving standing ovations for that. And then the third thing I want to mention just about the substance of this speech, if we look overall, and I think this is really significant, if we look overall at the way he was positioning himself, the things he was responding to, this was really far from the sort of victory speech that I think some people were expecting him to give. Instead, what we heard was a speech that was totally on the defensive. I think it showed the failure and weakness of Zionist forces in Gaza. And it showed that there's no room anymore for Netanyahu to continue this delusional lie that he's been peddling, that Israel is somehow winning this fight. Some of the political theater that he was doing. He was bringing like injured soldiers, telling their stories, just things that again were showing the cost that this has had on Zionist forces, and responding a lot to criticism. Half of his speech was, lies about civilian casualties. He just blatantly lied, saying that there, have barely been any civilian casualties. I think he said that it's the lowest ratio of non-combatant deaths in any urban war, which is a total lie. And there's just no room anymore for people to believe this lie. And I think that goes to show just the failure and weakness of this. Is no one is buying this anymore. No one except the warmongering Congress people who are standing up, applauding genocide. People just aren't falling for this, and that was clear throughout his speech, and it was clear that that Israel is really losing this fight.
Well, I think those points are well taken. And, one maybe manifestation of that is yesterday, his speech was met by large numbers of protesters in the streets of Washington, D.C. And I think, a lot of it, people expected people to get tired, for, the movement to wane, for people to not come out. It was a Wednesday, and all those things turned out to be true. So, I guess I just want to ask, it does seem that speaks that there is still vitality left, not a lot of tiredness in the movement in solidarity with Palestine. I wonder how you evaluate that.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think yesterday really showed that the movement is still really strong, really powerful, and really capable of creating a crisis for the political class. We saw tens of thousands of people take to the streets of DC, and people were facing horrific police brutality. People who are demanding an end to genocide and rejecting Netanyahu's disgraceful visit. We saw just this incredibly broad coalition asserting that the only place for this war criminal is behind bars. And again, I think what's really significant about the demonstration yesterday and about the movement in general is just the diversity of organizations that have come together, standing in solidarity with Palestine, standing for Palestinian liberation. There was over 100 organizations yesterday that endorsed and participated. We saw people on the streets from all walks of life, and people from all walks of life being attacked by the police. And another, significant development that we saw yesterday was the development within the labor movement. Seven of the largest unions in this country, who represent nearly 6 million workers, they all signed a letter demanding that the Biden administration immediately halt all military aid to Israel. And this is a really significant development here, a historic development. And at the same time, we saw this massive labor contingent at the protest yesterday. We had speakers from unions. So again, just this is showing what we already knew to be true since the start of this genocide, what we already knew to be true from polling. But there's this broad coalition of forces that have come together on the streets, and that show, again, that the vast majority of Americans want an immediate end to the genocide. This is as simply a fact, and nobody can ignore this fact any longer. But the response of the political establishment has not only to ignore this fact, but to continue warmongering and to continue increasing repression. This repression is evidenced by yesterday's police response. It was a peaceful protest. We were asserting our right to be in the streets, and we were met with this massive police presence. The NYPD was there. Why are we spending millions of taxpayer dollars for the NYPD to be bussed and housed in a hotel in DC overnight? And as we were trying to be in the street, which is our right to be, we were met with pepper spray, with tear gas, with violence. And this is police. Again, let's be really clear about this. Police are pepper spraying protesters who are standing against a nearly 10-month-long genocide that is estimated to, if it doesn't stop, the estimate is that over 180,000 Palestinians are going to die from this genocide. And instead, what we're seeing is the political establishment is choosing to protect a war criminal who is responsible for this genocide. But really, it's totally backfiring because they're showing their true colors. They're showing exactly who is carrying out the violence here. The only violence at yesterday's protests was the violence of the U.S. government, was the violence of Benjamin Netanyahu. And, instead they're repressing a group of people who are standing against genocide. But again, it's not going to succeed in quelling this movement. And the strength of this movement, I think, is going to continue for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. Well, one aspect of the movement, of course, has been, the evisceration of President Joe Biden's political campaign. At least one major part of it, of course, has been the anger around the genocide in Gaza. Now, of course, the Democrats have shifted their ticket. Should people have any expectation of any significant change in U.S. policy with Kamala Harris ascending to the Democratic presidency and potentially become a nomination, and potentially becoming the president? Or is it really a continuum with what we've seen with Biden?
I think that's a really important question, and it should be clarified that Kamala Harris does not represent any shift from the policies that the Biden administration has had so far towards the genocide in Gaza. We've seen her speaking at AIPAC. She's consistently come to defend, Israel has quote unquote the right to defend itself, supporting Israel, signing off on giving billions of dollars of military aid to Israel. So she represents the exact same line as Biden and as the vast majority of Democrats. I think yesterday too, there was some confusion about, Kamala didn't attend and a whole bunch of Democrats didn't attend, but we need to be clear that this isn't because of their position on Israel. All of these people support Israel. This is because the movement for Palestine has made it politically untenable for them to come and give a standing ovation to this genocidal maniac along with their colleagues in Congress. And we're seeing these breaks, out in the open now fully. We had, Nancy Pelosi say that this was the worst speech to Congress from any foreign leader. But again, let's be clear. This isn't because she, has any kind of solidarity with Palestine. No, not at all. This is because that, appearing like you're on the same side as Netanyahu is no longer viable politically. And it's us, the movement, that have exacted that political cost. And there's a real crisis for the Democrats right now. But I think one thing is clear is that people are not confused about this. People are really clear that the policy of the Democrats is the policy of U.S. imperialism, is going to be the policy of maintaining support for Israel, even as we start to see some movement with Democrats, calling for ceasefire, calling for a deal. Again, we have to remember that our demands go beyond ceasefire. Our demands are for the total liberation of Palestine, and our movement has to reflect that in continuing past a potential deal or anything of that sort.
Well, let me ask you this in the last couple of minutes we have here. I think one factor in all of this discussion that often gets lost is, the U.S. is going to do this, Netanyahu is going to do that. But it really seems that when we look at the course and the tenor of things, that maybe the real force that is shaping the entire contours of the conversation is the resistance of the Palestinian people, because all of the various schemes that have been frustrated so far from both the U.S. and Netanyahu, well, it's only because they haven't been able to succeed on the ground.
100%. Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because at the end of the day, it is the strength of the Palestinian resistance on the ground and the steadfastness of all the people of Gaza who've been enduring this brutal genocidal war for almost 10 months now. That is the real determining factor here in what is going to happen moving forward, and in the potential and for Palestinian liberation. Our role here in the belly of the beast is to continue putting pressure on the ruling class, is to continue making support for this genocide untenable, to continue calling for a ceasefire. And I think we're succeeding in that role, and the movement is succeeding. But in Gaza, as we saw from the speech, as we see every day, Israel is not achieving any of its military goals. The Palestinian resistance remains strong, and it's growing stronger. And instead, Zionist forces are relying on a strategy of total annihilation. They can't achieve any of their goals. And it is the Palestinian resistance ultimately that is gonna decide the outcome of this, and is gonna be able to achieve liberation for the Palestinian people.
Miriam Osman of the Palestinian Youth Movement, really appreciate you joining us here on the Freedom Side to help us sort through it all.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Happy to be here.